Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with you, and this is how to draft MTG. We're looking at my Edge of Eternities draft guide. Pre-releases this weekend. The set drops on Arena next week. We're going to get you up to speed, warp speed. How about that? With a pick order, archetype breakdown, and draft strategy. Let's start by looking at the mechanics for Edge of Eternities. We have a brand new card type, Spacecraft. Spacecrafts are artifacts that can be turned into creatures if you station them. To station a spacecraft, you tap another creature you control to add charge counters equal to its power to the spacecraft. You can only do this at sorcery speed, and the spacecraft will become a creature once you've hit a certain number of charge counters. These charge counters do not go away, and once the spacecraft is stationed, it will remain a creature for as long as it's on the battlefield. Station also gets around summoning sickness, so you can use a creature that you've just played to station a spacecraft. Also keep in mind that even once you've met the station threshold, you can continue to tap creatures to add charge counters to these spacecrafts, as there are some creatures that want to become tapped and give a bonus when they do. The next mechanic is warp. Some cards can be cast for their warp cost. If a spell is warped, it is exiled at the beginning of the next end step, and then you may cast it from exile on a later turn. Often these will have nice enter the battlefield abilities that we can use early in the game and then get the full effect of the card later on. Keep in mind that creatures that have been warped in can tap to station spacecrafts, since station gets around summoning sickness. The next mechanic is Void. Void cares about if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped this turn. If you can meet this condition, you will often get a small bonus on your spell or creature, but occasionally you'll get a really big one. As far as I can tell, these cards were designed so that Void only really matters on your own turn, so keep that in mind when drafting and deck building and during gameplay. And finally, we've got Landfall, an oldie but a goodie. Landfall cares about lands entering the battlefield under your control. We've also got a special new token in the set called a Lander. It's an artifact token. You can pay 2 mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to search your library for a basic land card of any type and put it onto the battlefield tapped. These will, of course, be really useful for mana fixing, as they're pretty much the only source of mana fixing in the set, and they'll also contribute to your landfall triggers, sometimes giving you multiple landfall triggers in a single turn. As always, if you enjoy the videos I'm making here, you can support by clicking like, clicking subscribe, and leaving a comment. It helps a huge amount, so thank you so much for doing that. Jumping into the pick order now, let's start with the early picks. The first card you're going to be looking at when you open your pack is, of course, the rare. But beyond that, we're looking for commons and uncommons that have these following characteristics. Flexibility, as in it fits in many different decks. Rate, as in you're getting a lot in return for the mana that you're spending. Power level, the higher the better. Curve, which usually means it's a cheap card, a 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana card that easily fits into your deck's mana curve. And finally, synergy. Does it play well with the other cards in this set? Does it fit into one of the best archetypes in the set? As always, we'll be starting with the premium removal. In white, we have Banishing Light, the classic 2 and a white enchantment. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. Black has Grav Kill, 3 and a black for an instant, exile target creature or spacecraft. Red's got Invasive Maneuvers, 1 and a red for an instant, deals 3 damage to target creature, or 5 damage instead if you control a spacecraft. Next, we'll look at good removal. Not the absolute best in the set, but you're still going to take it early, although you might take another powerful uncommon or common over one of these cards. Blue has Cryo Shatter, single blue for an enchantment. Enchants a creature, gives it -5, -0. When the enchanted creature becomes tapped or is dealt damage, destroy it. Lost in Space is 3 and a blue for an instant. Target artifact or creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library, and you surveil 1. Black's got a few here. We've got Dubious Delicacy, 2 and a black for an artifact food with flash. When it enters, up to 1 target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn, and you can pay 2 tap it and sacrifice it to gain 3 life or have the opponent lose 3 life. Depressurize is 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -3/-0 until end of turn. Then if that creature's power is 0 or less, destroy it. Tragic Trajectory is single black for a sorcery. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, but if you've triggered Void, if something has left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped, target creature instead gets -10/-10. Huge bonus there. We also have Vote Out, 3 and a black for a sorcery, destroys a creature, and it has Convoke, so you can tap creatures to reduce its cost. Red's got a few as well here. Bombard is 2 and a red for an instant, deals 4 to a creature. Orbital Plunge is 3 and a red for a sorcery, deals 6 to a creature, but if excess damage was dealt in this way, you get a Lander token, the artifacts that you can pay 2, tap, and sacrifice to search for a land. Really nice one here is it'll often be a 2-for-1 for you. Plasma Bolt is a single red for 2 damage to any target, and if you have Void, it deals 3 damage instead. So just super efficient and can even go face for the win. Green has Close Encounter. 1 and a green for an instant. You choose a creature you control or a warped creature you own in exile, and Close Encounter deals damage equal to the power of the chosen creature or card to target creature. Note that this cannot be interrupted by instant speed removal, as is often the case with these types of cards, because it says choose and not target. Diplomatic Relations is 2 and a green for an instant. Target creature you control, it should say. It doesn't here, but it should, and they've errated it. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 against Vigilance. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. And finally, Melt Strider's Resolve, single green for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature you control, makes it fight one of their creatures, gives it +0/+2, and says it can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. A lot of stuff here for just 1 mana. Really great rate. All right, that's all the removal. Now we're looking at the premium rate cards. This is just sort of a blanket term for really good commons and uncommons that aren't too expensive and fit in many different decks. Like I said, you may take some of these over the good removal, but probably not over the premium removal. Starfield Shepherd is 3 white for a 3/2 with flying. When it enters, you search your library for a plains or creature with mana value 1 or less, put it into your hand, and it can warp for 1 and a white. So very powerful to be able to play this on turn 2. Make sure you're hitting your land drops. Then on turn 5, you get another land or a 1-drop creature if you have it. Ton of value, and a 3/2 flyer is a very dangerous body. All Fate Stalker is 3 and a white for a 2/3. When it enters, you exile up to 1 target non-assassin creature until this creature leaves the battlefield. It can also warp in for 1 and a white. Kind of a useful warp ability here is you can reset one of your own creatures' enter the battlefield effects, or get a blocker out of the way, or target another creature that's been warped in. It will blink out and come back and stay permanently. So not only is this good removal on a creature, it's got some utility as well. Sunstar Expansionist is 1 and a white for a 2/3. When it enters, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you get a Lander token. Whenever a land you control enters, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So again, just a lot of rate. 2 mana 2/3 that can make a Lander. You're going to want to play this probably on turn 4 if you're on the draw, before you've played your land for the turn, and then you get to play another 2 mana spell or crack your Lander token. Night Luminary is 3 and a white for a 3/2 that makes a 1/1 token when it enters, and it can also warp in for 1 and a white. So on turn 2, get a 1/1 that essentially quote-unquote draws you this Night Luminary in exile, and you get to play that on turn 4. It's a 3-for-1, and quite a good common here for white. In blue, we've got Cerebral Download. 4 and a blue for an instant. Surveil X, where X is the number of artifacts you control, then draw 3 cards. If you have a lot of artifacts, this is probably one of the best uncommons in the set, and even if you don't, 5 mana draw 3 at instant speed is going to be pretty good in this format. Codecracker Hound is 2 and a blue for a 2/1. When it enters, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand and the other in your graveyard, and it warps in for 2 and a blue. So you can essentially do this twice. Just a lot of value for your 3 mana card. Desculpting Blast is 1 and a blue for an instant. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If it was attacking, you get a 1/1 drone token. Drone tokens show up a bunch in this set. They're 1/1 flyers that can only block creatures with flying. So again, just a huge amount of rate here. Get a 2 mana 1/1 flyer that bounces something at best case scenario, which is really, really good. Gigastorm Titan is 4 and a blue for a 4/4, but it costs 3 less to cast if you cast another spell this turn. So pretty easy to make this a 2 mana 4/4, which is quite a lot of rate. Got some Spacecraft here. Uthros Scan Ship is 3 and a blue for a 4/4 flying spacecraft with station 8+. When it enters, you draw 2 cards and discard a card. Most decks are probably going to want to have a spaceship in play most of the time. So one that comes down early like this and gives you a little bit of card advantage is quite nice. Specimen Freighter is 5 and a blue for a 4/7 flying spacecraft, station of 9+. When it enters, return up to 2 non-spacecraft creatures to their owner's hands. Those could even be your creatures if you need some extra value. And when it attacks, defending player mills 4 cards. Just a high-impact 6-drop that turns into a giant flyer. Uthros Psionicist is 2 and a blue for a 2/4. It says the second spell you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. This looks really powerful to me. You could play this on turn 3, and then on turn 4 immediately play a 2-drop and a 4-drop. Or you could play this on turn 4, followed by as high as a 3-drop. It's just passively adding a bunch of mana every turn on a 3-mana 2/4 body, I think is very, very excellent. Moving into black, Faller's Faithful is 2 and a black for a 3/1. When it enters, destroy up to 1 other target creature. If that creature wasn't dealt damage this turn, its controller draws 2 cards. So not great if you have to destroy one of their things and give them 2 cards, but sometimes you got to do that. If it's finishing something off after combat, that's nice. But the secret mode is to destroy one of your own things that wants to die for some reason and drawing 2 cards yourself. Cool card, lots of flexibility here. Umbral Caller Zealot is 1 and a black for a 3/2. Says sacrifice another creature or artifact to surveil 1. Great rate to begin with, and an unrestricted sacrifice engine is always something really powerful to have. In red, we have Galvanizing Saw Ship, 5 and a red for a 6/5 flying haste spacecraft with station of only 3. So it should be fairly straightforward to play this and station it up immediately and attack for some big damage. In green, we've got Eumidian Terrabotanist. 1 and a green for a 2/3 with Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you gain 1 life. Again, lots of rate here, and I think this is going to be a big part of the green ramp decks, just keeping you alive through the early game. Atmospheric Greenhouse is 4 and a green for a 5/4 flying trample spacecraft with station of 8. When the spacecraft enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Again, just a lot of stats here and makes it pretty easy for you to then go ahead and turn this into a creature. Larval Scoutlander is 2 and a green for a 3/3 flying spacecraft with station 7. When this spacecraft enters, you may sacrifice a land or lander. Keep that in mind. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this will be really powerful in decks that are trying to splash, that are trying to hit landfall triggers, that are just trying to ramp. And if you are getting to sacrifice a lander with this, it's essentially also giving you 2 free mana because you're getting to do the lander thing without paying any mana for it. So really try to do that. This is going to be a really powerful card, I think. Galactic Wayfarer, 2 and a green for a 3/3. When it enters, you get a lander token. Love it. Lash Whip Predator is 4 green for a 5/7 with reach that costs 2 less to cast if your opponents control 3 or more creatures. So pretty often this is going to be a 4 mana 5/7 reach, which is really good rate. And finally, Dauntless Scrapbot. This is an artifact creature, 3 mana for a 3/1 that exiles the opponent's graveyard and gives you a lander token. Again, just really great value here. Again, I'll just stress how important I think lander tokens are going to be. Hitting your land drops is always really important in Limited, and especially in this set where there are a lot of really expensive giant spacecrafts to be casting, and landers are also our only source of mana fixing. Not to mention, pulling a land out of your deck and putting it into play is straight up card advantage, and we love that. There are also a couple of Signpost uncommons that make their way into the early picks for me, which are Biomechan Engineer and Interceptor Mechan, the green-blue and black-red signposts, respectively. We're going to get into each Signpost uncommon individually as we go over the archetypes in just a moment. The Signpost uncommon's power level is directly tied to how good their actual archetypes are. And in most cases, you're not going to want to pick them up ahead of the premium and good removal and the premium rate cards, such as the ones we just discussed. However, these two in particular, I would make an exception for. And with that, let's get into the archetypes. White-blue in this set is Double Spell. Its Signpost uncommon is Station Monitor, which is white-blue for a 2/2. It says whenever you cast your second spell each turn, create a 1/1 colorless drone. The drone tokens are 1/1 flyers that can only block creatures with flying. A couple of other payoffs here. Ilvoy Infiltrator is a 2 and a blue 1/3 that can't be blocked if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn, and when it hits the opponent, you draw a card. We also have Sunstar Lightsmith, 3 and a white for a 3/3. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and draw a card. So a deck like this is going to be really dependent on having the right payoffs at the right time, and then actually being able to cast 2 spells at the right time to trigger those payoffs. So it can be a little bit finicky, and the rewards might not always be worth the amount of setup that's involved. In a deck like this, we're looking for lots of cheap spells so that we can cast multiple in a turn, and we love it when they draw cards, stuff like Mental Modulation and Honor, and cheap creatures like Ilvoy Galeblade, which can be sacrificed to draw a card, all fit in here. Cards with Warp do a great job of double spelling. Starfield Shepherd that we already looked at, and Starbreach Whale, a 5 mana 3/5 flying, surveils 2 on enter, and warps for 1 and a blue. Really nice to use these to set up your early draws, trigger your double spell stuff, and then have that card advantage of being able to cast them later on. Night Luminary also fits here, and it's nice that it affects the board with a 1/1 token on turn 2. And then Sinister Cryologist, if you're really in on this deck, you might play one of these, but it's not very effective. I would try to avoid it. And then there are a couple of minor payoffs here. Brightspear Zealot and Ilvoy Operative, curve filler creatures that get a little bit better if you could double spell. And then Uthros Psionicist that makes your second spell cost 2 less to cast. Should be really good here, spotting you 1 to 2 mana a turn. If we're making a bunch of drones with our station monitor, we may be interested in cards that count how many creatures we have, such as Focus Fire, or can pump up multiple creatures like Weft Blade Enhancer. And Exosuit Savior might work here as a way to return our own stuff to our hand to replay it and trigger double spell once again. So while I'm not super excited about this archetype, I think it's the only white deck that I'm actually interested in drafting. So we'll see why that is in just a moment here. Moving on to white-black Go Wide. The Signpost uncommon is Servandum the Lucent. 2 white-black-black for a 4/4 Death Touch lifelink. It's legendary. When it enters or attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain Death Touch until end of turn. And the rare version of Servandum, Sunstar Exemplar, is white-black for a 2/2 with Vigilance and Menace. It's legendary. Whenever another creature you control dies or is put into exile, this gets 1 bigger and you gain 1 life. And when it dies or is put into exile, while its power is 4 or greater, you get to destroy something. So both of these cards are pointing to a deck that wants to, quote-unquote, go wide, which means make a lot of small creatures. Except there's only 2 ways to do this, as far as I can tell. Night Luminary, and then a card called Honored Knight Captain, which is a 2 mana 1/1 that makes a 1/1 token. Black does have some interest in sacrificing its own stuff, so you might play something like Beamsaw Prospector, which is a 2 mana 2/1 that dies into a lander token. If you are able to make a wide board somehow, you'd want to pump up your team with Zealous Display and Weft Blade Enhancer. And I guess Dawnstrike Vanguard could do something here, but I don't really know how we're getting to the late game. If we want to sacrifice our own stuff, we get Embrace Oblivion, which is a nice removal spell, single black, but you have to sacrifice an artifact or creature, and you get to destroy a creature or spacecraft. Swarm Color and Comet Crawler both give you ways to sacrifice creatures for cards or for additional power, respectively. But unfortunately, there just doesn't seem to be that much support for the deck, so I don't see a real reason to draft white-black. I would suggest avoiding it in this format. White-red Tapped Creatures is next. Signpost uncommon is Sammy Ship's Engineer, 2 red-white for a 2/4 legendary. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, create a tapped 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. We've also got Vault Guard Trooper, 4 and a red for a 5/5. Beginning of your end step, if you have 2 tapped creatures, you may discard your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. So we want our creatures to be tapped, and if we can't do that by attacking, then we'll want to have a Spacecraft in play. And the one I like for this deck is Wedgelight Rammer, 3 and a white for a 3/4 flying first strike with Station 9. When it enters, you get a 2/2 robot, which is quite nice. So it adds to your board and gives you a quote-unquote tap outlet, a way to tap your creatures so that you can get these bonuses. So we want our stuff to be tapped, but we also don't want to just die because we have no blockers. So I think Flight Deck Coordinator will be important here. 2 and a white for a 3/3. At your end step, if you have 2 tapped creatures, you gain 2 life. I'm picturing having 2 of these in play and gaining 4 life a turn and actually sort of being able to stabilize as being a good plan. Maybe. Starfighter Pilot is another creature that likes to get tapped. It's 2 mana for a 2/2. When it becomes tapped, you surveil 1. Frontline War Rager is kind of a minor payoff here. 3 mana for a 2/3 that gets a +1/+1 counter if you've got 2 tapped creatures at your end step. And Dawnstrike Vanguard, the 6 mana 4/5 lifelink at the beginning of your end step. If you have 2 tapped creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control other than this creature. Probably just too expensive and too slow, but you might play a copy of one of these cards in this deck. We'll also be looking for Spacecraft to tap our creatures with. The earlier they come down, the better. So Wormwall Sleeper fits well here. 2 mana for a 2/2 flying with Station 4 when it enters, you surveil 2. And Debris Field Crusher 4 and a red for a 1/5 flying that can get pumped up. And when it enters, it deals 3 damage to any target. So a nice little removal spell on a Spacecraft here. It's got Station of 8. If we have 4 or 5 Spacecrafts, we'll want Pulsar Squadron Ace, a 2 mana for a 1/2 that looks at the top 5 and can put a Spacecraft into your hand. And a couple of expensive Spacecrafts you might play, as this deck kind of does look like it wants to go late. Rescue Skiff is 6 mana for a 5/6 flying. Station 10. When it enters, you get a creature enchantment from your graveyard to the battlefield. And Galvanizing Sawship is a real nice one, of course, the 6 mana 6/5 flying haste. Station 3. Keep in mind that warp creatures can pay for your station costs, so we'll want to include a few of those for sure. And we'll also want to be making sure that we're hitting our land drops, as again, this deck kind of wants to go late, kind of wants to play Spacecraft, so stuff that makes lander tokens like Kov Landseekers, 4 mana 4/3 menace that makes a lander, or creatures that tap for mana like Zookeeper Mechan, ramps you and adds to your tapped creature count. Cavaron Turbo Drone has a tap ability, and if all else fails, just attack your opponent. It's a good way to tap your creatures. If you do, you'll want a couple of combat tricks in your deck. Your opponent will be a little bit more incentivized to block, since it might look like you're just trying to tap your creatures. So they might think, oh, I'll just block here. They don't have anything. They're just trying to activate their stuff, and then you blow them out with a combat trick. It's pretty nice. But overall, I'm a little bit dubious of this deck. Anytime they try to do something different with white-red, it tends to not work out so well. I'm not sure that this deck really has what it takes to hang in the late game, and it doesn't seem to want to pressure the opponent early, so there's a little bit of tension there. I'll be avoiding this one, I think, early on. Final white deck we have is white-green +1/+1 counters. Signpost uncommon, Halia Ascendant Cadet, 2 green, white-white for a 3/3 legendary. When it enters or attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever one or more creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them deal damage to a player, you draw a card. And then we've also got Diadrine Synthesis Amalgamate Rare, X green white for a 0/1 that enters with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. So even if you don't pay anything for X, you still get a 0/1 with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever you attack, you may remove a +1/+1 counter for each of 2 creatures you control. If you do, you draw a card and you get a 2/2 robot. Pretty nice. So we want to be putting 1/1 counters on our creatures and hitting our opponent. Seems simple enough. Let's look for some creatures that come with 1/1 counters on them already. Dockworker Drone is a 2 mana 1/1 that comes with a counter, and when it dies, you get to move its counters to something else. Pulsar Squadron Ace is the Spacecraft finder, but if you don't find one, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so kind of fits here. Drix Fatemaker is a 4 mana 3/2 that comes with a +1/+1 counter and gives each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it trample. Trample is nice here, as we are trying to deal damage to our opponent. We don't want to get chump blocked. There are a couple of payoffs here that care about your creatures dying, which doesn't really make any sense to me in a deck like this, but we've got Rayblade Trooper and Meltstrider Eulogist, which give 1/1 humans and let you draw a card, respectively. And then an actual nice card for this deck is Atmospheric Greenhouse, the 5 mana Spacecraft that puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Night Luminary again fits here, as we want multiple bodies to put our counters on. Exosuit Savior can reset and enter the battlefield ability if we want to get some more counters on our stuff. And Biosynthetic Burst is a nice protection spell here. 2 mana for an instant that gives Reach, Trample, Indestructible, and untaps your creature, and comes along with a +1/+1 counter. Overall, there's some internal tension and friction in this deck, as it's trying to build up a board and attack the opponent, but the Signpost is a 5 mana 3/3. There's almost no evasion in this color pair, and it's also trying to get value off of its creatures dying. So this one doesn't really track for me. I'm going to be avoiding white-green in this format until I see it performing well. Next is blue-black Artifact Control. Signpost uncommon, Alpha Rail Dreaming Acolyte. 1 blue-black for a 2/3 legendary. When it enters, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. During your turn, Alpha Rail has Death Touch. We also have a nice rare here, Singularity Rupture. 3 blue-black for a sorcery, destroys all creatures, then any number of target players, each mill half their library rounded down, which is actually kind of a lot in limited. If you're able to stabilize after wiping the board with this, you might just be able to outlast your opponent until they deck out. Lots of support for this one. Some big payoffs here. Cerebral Download, the 5 mana Surveil X for the number of artifacts you control and then draw 3. Monoist Circuit Feeder is 4 black for 4/4 flying. When it enters, it pumps one of your creatures and shrinks one of theirs for how many artifacts you control. And Mechan Assembler, not as good as the other two, but still pretty decent. 4 and a blue for a 4/4. Whenever another artifact you control enters, you get a 2/2 robot. So we want a ton of artifacts in our deck, looking for early artifact creatures that block well, such as Hull Carver, a 1 mana 1/1 Death Touch, Monoist Sentry, 1 mana 4/1 Defender. Early plays with nice enters abilities like Virus Beetle, 2 mana 1/1 makes them discard. Dauntless Scrapbot gives us 2 artifacts, itself and the lander it creates. Cryogen Relic is a 2 mana artifact that draws a card when it enters or leaves the battlefield, which is nice. There's some synergy with sacrificing in this archetype. And Dubious Delicacy is the 3 mana artifact that gives something -3/-3. Of course, we can sacrifice that later for value as well. How convenient that our spacecrafts are also artifacts. Felgrav Ship is a nice value piece here. 3 mana for 3/2 flying lifelink station 8. When it enters, mill 3 and you get a spacecraft or creature from your graveyard to hand. Uthros Scan Ship, the 4 mana 4/4 station 8 with flying. When it enters, you draw 2 and discard 1. Caesarean Dirgecraft is 5 mana for 4/3 flying with station 7. When it enters, each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature. Kind of an actual nice removal spell here that turns into a threat later on. And then Specimen Freighter, the 6 mana 4/7 flying that bounces 2 things. If we want to play in the sacrifice space a little bit here, we've got Embrace Oblivion, the single mana, sacrifice something, destroy something. Selfcraft Mechan is 3 and a blue for a 3/4. When it enters, you can sacrifice an artifact. When you do, put a 1/1 counter on target creature and draw a card. Pretty nice. And Swarm Color, 3 and a black for a 2/4 flying. When it becomes tapped, you can sacrifice a creature or artifact to draw a card. Nice value here. Then just a few filler pieces here. Cloud Sculpt Technician is a 3 mana 1/4 flying, but it gets +1/+0 if you have an artifact, so decent little speed bump here. Steel Swarm Operator is a 2 mana 1/1 flying that can add mana for artifacts. And Scour for Scrap might be an interesting one for this deck. 3 and a blue to search your library for an artifact and also get an artifact back from your graveyard to hand. So if you've been discarding or sacrificing your artifacts, you can get them back and search up a nice Spacecraft. Pretty interesting card here. Overall, blue-black looks heavily supported to me, quite powerful, quite synergistic. This feels like a long game control format, and this deck seems to do that very well. I'm looking at this as one of the top archetypes in the set so far. Blue-red Artifact Control is next. Signpost uncommon is Memenin Uthros Exile, 1 blue-red for a 1/3 legendary with flying. Whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. We've also got a rare Pinnacle Emissary, 1 blue-red for a 3/3. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get a drone token, and it can warp in for a single mana. Another nice little payoff here for this deck, Weft Stalker Ardent, 3 mana for a 2/3. Whenever another creature or artifact you control enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we're looking to play a lot of artifacts and get our opponents dead as quickly as possible. Cards that make multiple artifacts are of course nice here. Caveron Harrier, single red for a 2/1 artifact creature. Then when it attacks, you can pay 2 to make a 2/2 robot that's tapped and attacking, and then you sacrifice the robot at end of combat. You're probably only getting to do that once, but still pretty nice that you get this extra trigger for free. Dauntless Scrapbot, again, 3 mana 3/1 make a lander. Kov Landseeker, 4 mana 4/3 make a lander. Nice ways to get artifacts and also gain card advantage. Cryogen Relic, the 1 and a blue artifact that when it enters or leaves, you draw a card and you can sacrifice it to put a stun counter on a tapped creature. Similar to Melded Moxite, 1 and a red for an artifact. When it enters, you may discard a card if you do draw 2 cards, and it can be sacrificed to make a robot if you pay 3 mana. Both of these adding to your artifact count and giving card advantage. And then kind of a decent payoff here, Oreplate Pangolin, 1 and a red for a 2/2. Artifact creature. Whenever another artifact you control enters, you can pay 1 to put a +1/+1 counter on the Pangolin. Should be a pretty threatening early play in this deck. Got the usual suspects here, the good Spacecraft, Uthros Scan Ship, Debris Field Crusher, Galvanizing Saw Ship, Specimen Freighter all fit well in this deck. Mechan Assembler, the 5 mana 4/4 that makes 2/2 robots. A little slow, but you'll probably still play it if you're in this deck. And then if you need aggressive 2-drops, you'll play Mechan Navigator and Mechan Shieldmate to fill out the curve. Blue-red looks reasonably well supported, maybe a little fragile. I'm not sure that this format is going to be very kind to aggressive strategies, but I think this deck could still be okay. Next is Blue-Green Lander Ramp, and this could really just be green whatever ramp. I think the ramp deck is essentially all of what green is trying to do in this format, as I don't think that green-white is actually a good deck. So if you're in green, I think you're trying to do a ramp strategy with lander tokens, and I think blue-green is the most natural home for this strategy, so we're going to start there. Biomechan Engineer is the Signpost uncommon, green-blue for a 2/2. It's not legendary, which is nice. When it enters, you get a lander token, and you can pay 8 mana to draw 2 cards and create a 2/2 robot token. So this is providing great value early game, works with your game plan, and then if it somehow survives, it's a must-kill threat for the opponent. So kind of either way, you're just loving it. Gene Morph Imago is a rare green-blue for a 1/3 flying. Whenever a land you control enters, target creature becomes a 3/3. If you have 6 or more lands, the creature becomes a 6/6 instead. So another early play that's really problematic as the game goes on. And then a nice build around here, Seed Ship Agrarian, 3 and a green for a 3/3. When it becomes tapped, you get a lander token, and whenever a land you control enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So it kind of does it all by itself, but you do really want to support this with a Spacecraft to enable the tapping ability and a bunch of landers to make it grow really big. So we need to stay alive, and we need to get a lot of lander tokens in play. Eumidian Terrabotanist, the 2-mana 2/3 with Landfall, gain a life, is going to help us not die. And then cards like Sammy's Curiosity, single green, gain 2 life, get a lander. Galactic Wayfarer, 3-mana 3/3, get a lander. Dauntless Scrapbot, 3-mana 3/1, get a lander. These are all going to help us hit our land drops and get to some big mana plays. Edge Rover is kind of an interesting one. Single green for a 2/2 reach. When it dies, each player creates a lander. I never like giving the opponent value, but this does contribute to our game plan, hopefully more than theirs. And a 1-mana 2/2 is a nice way to keep the board stable early on. Larval Scoutlander, the 3-mana 3/3 Spacecraft, is Station 7. You can sacrifice a land or lander to get 2 lands. Really helpful, especially if you're splashing in this deck, which you probably will be a lot of the time. All right, so we got a ton of lands in play. Let's play some big stuff. Glacier Godmom, Mouth of the Storm, Specimen Freighter, all really nice big mana plays for this deck. And at common, sneakily, we've got Pinnacle Killship, 7-mana 7/7 flying Spacecraft, Station 7. When it enters, deals 10 damage to something. Not a player, though, just a creature. Kind of actually really good for a common. So if you don't hit any of the sweet uncommon big things, you can play a couple of these and they'll do some work for you. And Mechanizoa on the low end of stuff we want to be doing here, but still decent. 6 mana for 5/5. Tap something, puts a stun counter on it, and can warp for 2 and a blue. So it can kind of help you stay alive early as well, but not really a card you want to play. Some other sort of passive income for this deck, if you will. Use Social Engineering, the 5-mana enchantment. Whenever land you control enters, you get a 2/2 robot. You can warp for 1 and a green. Mechan Assembler, whenever an artifact you control enters, you get a 2/2 robot. So landers count as artifacts. If you're making a lot of those, you might get a couple extra tokens out of the deal, not too bad. And then Uthros Psionicist. I actually think this is the best place for this card, as you're going to get that full 2-mana discount as you're playing cards with higher mana values. And it's a nice body early on for blocking. There's also a theme in this archetype of playing differently named lands. Cards that get better when you have multiple lands in play with different names. Fungal Colossus is a 7-mana 5/5 that gets cheaper for each differently named land you control. Not a great one, but you might play it. Survey Mechan is a 4-mana 1/3 flying hexproof that's got a 10-mana activated ability where it deals 3 damage to something. You draw 3 cards, you gain 3 life, but it costs 1 less for each differently named land you control. This one, I think you have to be really in on this plan to want to play this, since it also costs 4 mana up front and essentially does nothing on the board. And then All Fate Scroll is the best of them, I think. 3 mana for an artifact that taps for mana of any color, so helps you ramp. Then later on, you can pay 7, tap, and sacrifice it to draw X cards for each differently named land you control. So these could be a reason for you to just include 1 mountain, 1 swamp, 1 plains in the deck. You're probably already playing 18 lands anyways, and probably trying to splash as well. So if you've got a couple of these payoffs and you want to go in on them, I think that's a viable strategy. So we can also touch red for Tanuk Memorial Ensign, 1 red-green for a 2/4. Whenever land you control enters, deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then if it's the second time this has happened this turn, you draw a card. Nice value and nice sort of win conditional wrapped into one. You got Biotech Specialist at rare, red-green for a 1/3, gives you a lander. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, deals 2 damage to target opponents. The same sort of thing. Static kind of passive win condition. And then Territorial Bruntar is 4 red for a 6/6 reach. Whenever a land you control enters, you exile cards from the top of your library until you get a non-land and you cast it this turn. So just kind of a big dude that gives extra card advantage. You also get access to Remnant Elemental as an early game play, and Kav Landseeker and Orbital Plunge as extra ways to get lander tokens. I'm not sure there's enough here to make a dedicated red-green deck, so I think this is either going to be an offshoot of the blue-green deck or it's going to splash around for some of these effects. So I'm sort of lumping it in here. You might also touch black for some extra value from Fell Graveship or the Signpost Uncommon Seed Ship Brood Tender, black-green for a 2/3 that mills you for 3, and then you can pay 5 mana and sacrifice it to bring back a creature or spacecraft from the graveyard to the battlefield. Or if you're just trying to play some more removal, black's a good place to be. But there's really no support for an actual black-green quote-unquote graveyard deck as advertised in this set. So I don't see any reason to actually draft this as an archetype. You're just going to sort of play some of these black cards in your green ramp decks because they're good cards. So overall, I really like the green landfall lander ramp strategy. I think it's going to be a big linchpin of the format. Obviously kind of encompasses all of the viable green archetypes in my opinion, so I think it's going to be a big part of the format and quite powerful. Anytime you get paid off for playing lands, it's a pretty good place to be because lands are the fundamental resource of the game. And finally, we've got black-red Void Aggro. Interceptor Mechan is the Signpost Uncommon, 2 black-red for a 2/2 flying artifact creature. When it enters, return target artifact or creature from your graveyard to your hand, and at the beginning of your end step, if you triggered Void, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped, the Mechan gets a +1/+1 counter. So we're all about triggering Void, and we're all about damaging the opponent. Couple nice payoffs here. Hilderblade, single black for an artifact equipment, gives +3/+1, and you get to equip it for free at the end of your turn if you've triggered Void. Pretty sweet, as whatever this is on is going to be a must-kill for your opponent. So if they have to block and trade, you get another free equip, or if they kill it on your turn, you get another free equip. So it makes their life pretty awkward, and then eventually you're just going to be able to pay 4 to equip it and keep the pressure going. Roving Actuator is 3 and a red for a 3/4 artifact creature. When it enters, if you triggered Void, you get to cast a mana value 2 or less spell from your graveyard. A couple of really nice removal spells in red and black that are nice and cheap that work well with this. So if you've got a few of those and some ways to trigger Void, this is going to be really powerful. Few other payoffs that care about Void. Insatiable Skittermaw is a 3 mana 2/2 that gets a 1/1 counter at end of turn. And Caveron Skywarden is a 5 mana 4/5 reach, same text. Void Forge Titan is a 5 mana 5/4. At the beginning of your end step, if you triggered Void, you draw a card and lose a life. Not amazing, but you're going to play it here for sure. And then a few spells that get better with Void. Hymn of the Faller is 2 mana for a sorcery. Surveil 1, draw 1, lose 1. But if you've got Void, you draw an additional card. So that's quite a big bump there. Tragic Trajectory, of course, the single black, -2/-2. But if you have Void, it's -10 instead. And Temporal Intervention is a 3 mana spell that costs 2 less if you void it. And you get to look at their hand, make them discard a card. So for 1 mana, this is pretty good. You'll play 1 or 2 of these, I would think. Of course, we need ways to actually trigger Void, so ways to sacrifice our own stuff is probably going to be the best way to do that. Umbral Color Zealot, the 2 mana 3/2 that could sacrifice creatures and artifacts to Surveil. Embrace Oblivion, single black, sacrifice a thing, destroy a thing. Comet Crawler, the 3 mana 2/3 lifelink. When it attacks, you can sacrifice something to give it +2/+0. It's a nice aggressive card, plus sack outlet. And if you're sacrificing a bunch of stuff, Lightless Evangel likes that because it's a 2 mana 2/2 that gets bigger each time you sacrifice something. You can also look for cards that can sacrifice themselves, such as Melded Moxite and Dubious Delicacy, as well as Caveron Harrier, the 1 mana 2/1 that you can pay 2 when it attacks to make a 2/2 robot that sacrifices itself. Pretty useful here as it's aggressive and triggers Void. Beamsaw Prospector is a 2 mana 2/1 that dies into something. You don't mind sacrificing it. Terrapact Intimidator is a 2 mana 2/1, and your opponent chooses whether they want to give you 2 landers, which will give you 2 Void triggers, or put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Intimidator, which gives you a 2 mana 4/3, and you're an aggro deck, so you love that. Scrounge for Eternity is probably not great in this deck, but it kind of fits here. 2 and a black for a sorcery. You sacrifice something to return something from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you get a lander token as well. so that'll give you an additional Void trigger. Kav, Landseeker, and Orbital Plunge fit here as ways to make additional lander tokens for more Void triggers and more land drops, which is nice. And if you're sacrificing a bunch of stuff, then you're pretty happy to play Systems Override for 3 mana to steal a creature or spacecraft of your opponents, hit them with it, and then go ahead and sacrifice it for value. Weftstalker Ardent and Caesurian Voidborn are both going to chip away at your opponent's life total as your creatures enter and leave the battlefield. Overall, Black-Red looks pretty well supported, pretty flexible. I like what's going on here. I think it's going to be a pretty good deck. All right, so that does it for the archetypes. Let's get into the draft strategy. In pack 1, we're going to stay close to one color if possible. A few off-color cards are okay. And we're going to prioritize cheaper cards where we can. The better our early picks are, the more we want to stick to the color that our early picks are in. The worse our early picks are, the more we're willing to take chances on other colors throughout this pack, try to find something that's open and going to work out for us later in the draft. Pay special attention to picks 9 through 14, known as the wheel. This means the pack has come all the way around the 8-player table, and the cards remaining are cards that no one at the table wanted. If you're seeing decent to good cards in these wheel packs, you may want to heavily consider moving in to that color or color pair. In packs 2 and 3, we're going to continue to take powerful cards of our main color where possible and let the good cards we open or get past determine our secondary color and final archetype. Pay special attention to the pack direction. The packs are moving in the opposite direction during pack 2, so it's normal to not see the same signals or the same colored cards as you saw in pack 1. Don't panic. Pack 3 returns to the same direction as pack 1. So if you identified that a lot of good blue cards were coming to you in pack 1, for example, in pack 2 you may not see any. That's okay. Stay the course. Pack 3, you will most likely see good blue cards once again. As you're drafting, always ask yourself, where does this card belong? A lot of cards can look similar in power level, but if you try to put them into the context of an actual deck, it can become really clear which cards give you more flexibility during the draft, offer you more different directions to go down, and which ones push you into a more specific deck and should not be taken as early. For example, we've got Lost in Space, the 4-mana blue instant that puts something on top or bottom and you surveil 1. You're always going to play this in any deck that's playing blue. This is a great early pick. Starbreach Whale is the 5-mana 3/5 flying when it enters Surveil 2, and it can warp for 1 and a blue. Fine in blue-white since it's got a warp ability. Probably pretty good in blue-black since you want to Surveil 2 early on and then have a big threat later in the game. And I think blue-green is fine with this as well, as it could set up your early draws and then it's something to do later. It's not great, but I could see playing it there. However, in blue-red, which really cares about artifacts, this creature is not an artifact, nor does it create one, so you're not going to play it in blue-red. So it only fits in 3 out of the 4 possible blue decks. Cryogen Relic is the 2-mana artifact. When it enters or leaves, you draw a card and you can sacrifice it to put a stun counter on a tapped creature. Blue-green ramp doesn't care about this at all. Blue-white, it kind of works with the double spell thing, but if you're putting this in your blue-white deck, I think your deck is probably going to be pretty bad, so I would not consider it a blue-white playable. However, blue-black and blue-red, of course, love artifacts, so they both want this. So it fits into 2 decks. And then finally, Mouth of the Storm is a 7-mana 6/6 flying ward 2. When it enters, it shrinks your opponent's board for a turn. Obviously super powerful, but outside of blue-green that's actively trying to ramp towards a big spell, maybe blue-black that's trying to make the game go long, the other decks don't want this card at all. So I would say this really only fits in 1 deck, maybe 1.5 decks. And blue-black has better payoffs up the mana curve anyway. So try to keep this in mind when drafting. Where does the card go? Does it fit in with what you've already drafted? Deck building tips. Play 2 colors. Play 17 lands. A deck with no cards that cost more than 4 mana can play 16 lands. I don't think you're ever playing 16 lands in this format. I'm just going to say that right now. I think you're actually more likely to play 18, as the games seem to want to be going pretty long. Lots of big, splashy spells to be played. So I would lean towards 18 much more often than leaning towards 16. Want to play a low curve, lots of cheap cards, few expensive cards. I think that still applies here. There's only so much space for your 6-drop, 7-drop cards. You can only really fit, 4 of those, maybe 5 in a deck that's specifically designed to go big. So you still really are going to want to be prioritizing cheap cards, 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana plays, really important. And on the play 2 colors point, You can, of course, splash if you've specifically designed to do so. So if you have a lot of ways to make landers and you're trying to go into the long game, you can play one basic land of your splash color and, you know, 1 or 2 cards that you're trying to splash. But you really do want your mana base to be nice and consistent, 9 sources at a minimum of your main color. For those of you playing in a pre-release this weekend, I'll highlight a few cards that get a little bit better in sealed deck. Clunky kind of removal that's too expensive is usually still pretty good in sealed. So something like Thaumaton Torpedo, 1 mana for an artifact, 6 and tap to destroy something. Pinnacle Killship is, I think it's kind of decent in draft, but will be quite good in sealed, I think. 7 mana, 7/7 flying. Spacecraft comes in, deals 10 damage to a creature. And Shattered Wings, because the games are going to be even slower and people are going to be playing their Spacecrafts, I think most of the time, 3 mana Destroy a Flyer is pretty good in sealed. Also cards that have mana sink abilities on them, like Zookeeper Mechan, where you can pay 7 mana to give a creature +4/+0. The games that go long, these scale well. Clunky big things that are a little bit too slow for draft, like Nebula Dragon, 7 mana, 4/4 flying, deals 3 when it comes in, and Dawnstrike Vanguard. If games go long enough and you're not being pressured, this could do some work for you for sure. All right, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please click like, leave a comment, and click subscribe if you want to support the channel. I really appreciate it. It helps a ton. You can reach out to me directly, howtodraftmtg@gmail.com, if you'd like to inquire about private coaching or if you have any other questions. Until next time, good luck in your drafts. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.